My name is Victoria, and I'm 45 years old. On the outside, I probably look like your average, well-put-together woman. Maybe a little tired around the eyes, but who isn't these days? I have a comfortable home, a job that pays the bills, and a routine that, for the most part, keeps me afloat. But every night, like clockwork, the calm facade cracks. At 3 a.m., my eyes snap open, and it's like a tidal wave of ice water crashing over me. My heart hammers against my ribs, a cold sweat breaks out, and my breath catches in my throat. It's not a nightmare. There are no monsters under the bed, no shadowy figures in the corner. It's just panic. Pure, unadulterated terror for no discernible reason. I've tried to talk about it, of course. To friends, to family. Their responses are always the same, delivered with a dismissive wave of the hand or a patronizing pat on the arm. "Oh, Victoria, you're just being dramatic." Or, "You worry too much." They say it like it's a character flaw, an overreaction to the mundane anxieties of life. But how do you explain that paralyzing fear, that visceral dread, when there's nothing there to be afraid of? How do you describe the feeling of your own body betraying you, turning on you in the dead of night? It's isolating, infuriating, and utterly exhausting. This isn't drama, this is my life. And for too long, I've let their words silence me, internalizing the shame of being too much. But that changes now. This isn't just my story. It's a voice for anyone who's ever been told their pain isn't real. If you've ever felt misunderstood, like your deepest struggles are simply dismissed as an overreaction, then this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button, leave a comment, and let's unravel this together. The panic didn't start at 3 a.m. It began much earlier, in whispers and shadows, long before it found its current, relentless rhythm. My childhood home, a seemingly idyllic two-story with a porch swing and a rose garden, was a masterclass in silent suffering. My father, a man of few words and even fewer emotions, ruled with a quiet authority that felt heavier than any shouted command. My mother, beautiful and fragile, was a perpetual victim, forever playing the martyr, sighing dramatically over every minor inconvenience, her unspoken resentments hanging in the air like a suffocating fog. I was an only child, a little satellite caught in their desolate orbit. Their arguments weren't loud, never exploding into shattered plates or raised voices. Instead, they were cold wars, fought with frosty silences and carefully averted gazes. I'd lie in my bed, a small, helpless observer, listening to the suffocating quiet downstairs, more terrifying than any scream. It was in those moments, curled up under my quilt, that the first tendrils of anxiety began to coil around my small heart. I learned to anticipate, to read the subtle shifts in their moods, to become hypervigilant to the unspoken. A slightly too loud closing of a door, a lingering silence at the dinner table. Each was a harbinger of the emotional storm brewing beneath the surface. I built walls around myself, not out of malice, but out of a desperate need to protect a tender core that felt constantly exposed. I learned to blend in, to not make waves, to become invisible, hoping that if I was quiet enough, if I was good enough, the tension would simply dissipate. It never did. The 3 a.m. panic, I now realize, is just the amplified echo of those long-ago nights, a physical manifestation of a childhood spent walking on eggshells. The quiet hum of the refrigerator often feels like the loudest sound in the house during those early morning hours, a stark contrast to the cacophony of my racing thoughts. My 20s were a blur of trying to outrun my past. I threw myself into work, into relationships that were as fleeting as they were intense. Anything to avoid the quiet stillness that invited those familiar anxieties back in. I moved across the country, seeking a fresh start, a geographic cure for a wound that was far deeper than miles could mend. For a while it worked. The novelty of a new city, the excitement of new experiences, it all provided a welcome distraction. But the threads of that early childhood, though stretched thin, never truly broke. Then came David. He was everything my father wasn't. Warm, expressive, and seemingly unburdened by the emotional baggage that weighed me down. He saw past my carefully constructed facade, or so I thought. Our early years together were a whirlwind of passion and discovery, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of hope that perhaps I could escape the shadows of my past. We built a life, a beautiful home, and even talked about children. It felt like a dream, a true escape. But as time wore on, the cracks began to show. My need for control, a survival mechanism from childhood, slowly began to chafe against his laid-back nature. My anxieties, once dormant, began to resurface, manifesting as an irrational fear of abandonment, a constant need for reassurance that he couldn't always provide. He grew tired of my moods, as he called them, tired of the emotional tightrope I constantly felt I was walking. "You're just being dramatic, Victoria," he'd sigh, his voice laced with exasperation, echoing the very words that had haunted me for years. Each time he said it, a piece of me crumbled. It wasn't a malicious statement, not really. He just didn't understand. How could he? I barely understood it myself. But his dismissal felt like a betrayal, a confirmation that I was indeed too much, too broken to be loved fully. Our dream house became a battleground of unspoken expectations and escalating resentments. The silence, once a comfort, now felt heavy with accusation. The panic attacks, which had been sporadic, began to intensify, becoming more frequent, more brutal. And then, one cold morning, David packed his bags. "I can't do this anymore, Victoria," he said, his voice flat. "You're just too much drama." He left, taking with him not just his belongings, but the last vestiges of my hope for a normal life. The unraveling was complete. The silence after David left was deafening, the kind that vibrates in your bones and makes every creak of the house sound like a monstrous groan. After David left, the 3 a.m. panic attacks became my constant companion, a cruel alarm clock signaling the beginning of another night of terror. My days were spent in a haze of exhaustion, a struggle to put one foot in front of the other. The carefully constructed life I had built, piece by fragile piece, had shattered, and I felt utterly lost in the debris. My career, once a source of pride, became a monotonous chore. My friendships, once vibrant, withered under the weight of my withdrawal. I became a recluse, shying away from social interactions, convinced that my drama would infect anyone who came too close. The shame was a heavy cloak, suffocating me, preventing me from reaching out, from seeking the help I so desperately needed. I tried to talk to my mother, to explain the depth of my despair, the terror that gripped me each night. I still craved her understanding, her validation, even after all these years. But she just patted my hand, her eyes filled with a familiar, distant pity. "Oh, honey," she'd say, "you just need to cheer up. Everyone has problems. You're making a mountain out of a molehill." It was the same dismissive response, wrapped in a thin veneer of maternal concern, that she had always offered. She never saw my struggles as real, only as inconveniences, as a deviation from her own carefully curated narrative of a perfect, albeit suffering, life. She was still the perpetual victim, and my pain simply didn't fit into her story. My father, true to form, offered even less. A grunt, a shrug, a change of subject. His silence was a constant, impenetrable wall. It was then, in the stark loneliness of my apartment, that I began to understand the true weight of unspoken words. The things that were never said, the emotions that were never acknowledged, the pain that was always dismissed. These were the true architects of my panic. The familial drama wasn't about explosions, but implosions. It wasn't about shouting matches, but the quiet erosion of trust and connection. The unaddressed trauma of my childhood, the constant invalidation, had created a deep well of anxiety within me. And now, in the quiet hours of the night, that well overflowed, drowning me in a terrifying tide of fear. I realized then that my panic wasn't drama. It was the raw, unedited echo of a lifetime of suppressed emotions, a desperate plea from a soul that had been told for too long that its pain wasn't real. Sometimes, in the darkest moments, the quiet creak of the old floorboards upstairs sounds like a whisper, urging me to find my way back to myself. One particularly brutal morning, after another 3 a.m. attack that left me gasping for air and soaked in sweat, I finally hit rock bottom. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, truly saw the haunted look in my eyes, the deep circles beneath them, the pale, drawn face. This wasn't me. This wasn't the vibrant, hopeful woman I used to be, nor was it the strong woman I yearned to become. In that moment of utter despair, a small, defiant spark ignited within me. I was tired of being dismissed, tired of living in the shadow of other people's perceptions. I was tired of being dramatic. I picked up my phone, my fingers trembling, and searched for therapists. It felt like an admission of defeat, a surrender to the idea that there was something fundamentally wrong with me. But paradoxically, it also felt like a nascent act of self-preservation. I found Dr. Eris, a woman with kind eyes and a calm demeanor. Her office was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the cold, sterile feeling of my own emotional landscape. When I finally sat across from her, the words tumbled out, a raw, incoherent mess of childhood memories, romantic failures, and the terrifying nightly panic. I braced myself for the familiar, dismissive platitudes. But they never came. Instead, Dr. Eris listened, truly listened, with an unwavering gaze and a gentle nod. When I finished, exhausted and tearful, she simply said, "Victoria, what you're experiencing is real. It's not drama. It's a manifestation of deeply held anxieties, likely rooted in your early experiences." Her words were a lifeline, a glimmer of recognition in a world that had always told me I was imagining things. For the first time, I felt seen, heard, and validated. It was a small step, a tentative shift, but it was a beginning. The glimmer of recognition was faint, but it was enough to spark a flicker of hope, a fragile belief that perhaps, just perhaps, I wasn't destined to live forever in the shadow of my family's unspoken dramas and my own debilitating panic. The therapist's office, with its soft lighting and quiet hum, felt like a small island of calm in the swirling sea of my anxieties. Therapy became my sanctuary, the one place where I could truly be myself, without judgment or dismissal. Dr. Eris helped me unravel the tangled threads of my past, to connect the dots between my childhood experiences and the panic that plagued my nights. We talked about my parents, not with blame, but with understanding. We explored the subtle forms of emotional neglect I had experienced, the constant pressure to be good and unproblematic, the learned behavior of suppressing my own needs and emotions for the sake of maintaining a fragile peace. I began to see how their drama, though never outwardly explosive, was a silent, insidious force that shaped my entire being. It was in one of these sessions that a profound realization hit me. The 3 a.m. panic wasn't about the present. It was about the past, a desperate attempt by my subconscious to process and release the unresolved trauma of a childhood spent in constant vigilance. The fear of the unknown, the feeling of powerlessness, the dread that something terrible was always lurking just beneath the surface. These were the feelings that had become ingrained in my nervous system. Dr. Eris introduced me to mindfulness techniques, teaching me to observe my thoughts and feelings without judgment, to allow them to pass through me rather than getting caught in their undertow. It was incredibly difficult at first. My mind, so accustomed to racing and catastrophizing, resisted the stillness. But slowly, painstakingly, I began to practice. I learned to breathe through the panic, to ground myself in the present moment, to remind myself that I was safe, that the fear was a memory, not a current reality. Unpacking the baggage of my past was painful, but it was also liberating. Each session chipped away at the shame and self-blame that had weighed me down for so long. I was finally beginning to understand that my dramatic reactions were not a flaw, but a symptom, a cry for help from a part of myself that had been silenced for far too long. The journey to heal felt like walking through a dense fog, where each step forward revealed only a little more of the path ahead. The path to healing was not linear. There were days, weeks even, where the panic still felt overwhelming, where the darkness threatened to consume me. But with each setback, I found a renewed determination to keep going. I started to make small, deliberate changes in my life. I reconnected with friends, opening up to them about my struggles, not just the sanitized versions I had always presented. To my surprise, many of them responded with empathy and understanding, sharing their own vulnerabilities. The fear of being too much slowly began to dissipate as I realized that true connection came from authenticity, not from hiding my pain. I also began to assert myself, to reclaim my voice in situations where I had previously remained silent. I set boundaries, politely but firmly, with my mother when her dismissive comments resurfaced. I learned to say no without guilt, to prioritize my own well-being over the unspoken expectations of others. It was empowering, a powerful antidote to the years of self-silence. The 3 a.m. panic didn't magically disappear overnight, but its intensity began to wane. The attacks became less frequent, less prolonged. I learned to anticipate them, to use the techniques Dr. Eris had taught me, to ride the wave of fear rather than being drowned by it. And in those quiet moments after an attack, a new feeling began to emerge, self-compassion. I was no longer angry at myself for being dramatic. Instead, I saw my panic as a brave messenger, a part of me that was finally demanding to be heard, to be healed. Reclaiming my voice wasn't just about speaking up. It was about listening to myself, to the deepest parts of my being that had been silenced for far too long. It was about accepting that my feelings were valid, that my experiences were real, and that I was worthy of healing. The quiet strength I found within myself felt like a steady, burning ember, promising warmth even on the coldest nights. Today, at 47, the 3 a.m. panic still visits sometimes, a lingering echo of a past that shaped me. But it no longer defines me. My parents, still living in their carefully constructed world, continue to offer their well-meaning but ultimately unhelpful advice. I no longer seek their validation. I've found it within myself. I've learned that healing isn't about erasing the past, but about integrating it, understanding how it shaped me, and then choosing to move forward with compassion and resilience. The key lesson I learned from this journey is that our drama, the pain that others dismiss, is often a profound cry for understanding, a signal that something within us needs attention, love, and validation. It's not a weakness, it's a strength in disguise, urging us to confront what has been left unaddressed. If you're reading this and you've ever been told you're just being dramatic, please know that your feelings are valid. Your pain is real. Don't let anyone diminish your experience. Seek help, speak your truth, and find those who will truly listen. Your journey to healing may be long and challenging, but it is deeply rewarding. It's about reclaiming your voice, embracing your vulnerability, and ultimately, finding peace within yourself. I've walked through the fire, and while the scars remain, they are a testament to my resilience, a reminder that I am strong enough to face whatever comes next. And in that strength, there is a profound sense of peace.